5 years is a long time to keep your mouth shut. It's a long time to watch people you share blood with strip away your dignity, piece by piece, while you're forced to smile and clap for their achievements. People always say, family is everything. But what happens when family is just a polite word for your biggest bullies? Let me paint a picture for you. The year was 2021. I had just launched a small software firm from my basement. It was a grind, 18-hour days, cold coffee, and the constant fear of failure. But it was mine. My brother, Marcus, was working at a corporate firm where he basically pushed papers and played golf with clients. My sister, Clara, was an influencer who spent more time on her outfits than on anything productive. Then, the turning point. My startup took off. I landed a massive contract with an international firm. I was ready to celebrate, to tell my parents that I had finally done it. But that same week, my father's business was struggling. He was weeks away from closing shop. I, the good son, decided to help. I used my company's capital to bail him out. I became the silent investor. I didn't want the credit. I just wanted them to be okay. That was my biggest mistake. The moment they got that injection of cash, the dynamic changed. They didn't see it as a lifesaver. They saw it as their success. They rebranded the company, took the credit for the innovations I had secretly pushed through, and suddenly Marcus was the prodigy CEO and Clara was the chief marketing officer. And me? I was back in the basement. "You're not cut out for the spotlight, Alex," my father told me during a family dinner where they were celebrating Marcus's promotion. "You're better behind the scenes. Just handle the back end, do the paperwork, and let your brother run the show. He has the personality for it." I remember looking at my mother. She didn't look up from her plate. She just nodded, adding, "And Alex, try to dress a bit better. You're embarrassing your sister at these public events." I sat there, eating the food that my money had paid for in a house that my business had saved from foreclosure, and I felt the last drop of filial love evaporate. I realized then that they didn't respect me, not because I was a failure, but because they had decided I was one. It was a narrative they had written for me, and they refused to let me edit it. So I decided to play the part. I became the invisible employee. I became the errand boy. For 5 long years, I took their insults, their condescension, and their gaslighting. "You look tired, Alex," Marcus would say, after I'd spent all night fixing his catastrophic coding errors. "Maybe you should just take a break. You're not built for high-stakes business." I'd smile, nod, and go back to my office, the one I kept at a different location, and I'd work harder. I wasn't just working for a paycheck anymore. I was working for the end of their story. Every insult, every "you're nothing," every time they excluded me from the table, I wrote it down. I kept a ledger of every betrayal. I learned the most dangerous thing you can ever learn about people. They will always underestimate you if they think they have power over you. And my family? They were drunk on power. They were so busy building their pedestals that they didn't notice I was busy digging the pit beneath them. They thought I was their secret weapon, but in reality, I was their time bomb. For those 5 years, I wasn't just the failure, I was the ghost in the machine. As the silent owner of the firm, I had access to the master server, the encrypted financial ledgers, and the legal foundations of every contract my brother, Marcus, signed. I knew every account number, every offshore tax loophole they were exploiting, and every single promise they made to clients that they couldn't possibly keep. The planning phase wasn't just about money. It was about exposing the rot. I began by isolating their dependencies. I knew that Marcus was a coward who relied entirely on a specific consultant, a man named Mr. Henderson, to handle all of his technical negotiations. I reached out to Henderson 3 years prior, not to fire him, but to hire him. I offered him a contract that was triple his current salary, with one condition. He was to give Marcus nothing but safe, mediocre, and ultimately doomed advice. For 3 years, every move Marcus made was guided by someone who was effectively my puppet. Every big win Marcus thought he had was a calculated setup by me to lead him further into a position of vulnerability. Then I turned my attention to Clara, the influencer's sister. She was obsessed with her brand. She wanted to launch a high-end luxury fashion line using the company's capital. My father was skeptical, but Marcus, eager to look like the generous brother, greenlit the budget. I didn't stop it. In fact, I helped her. I set up the supply chain, found the vendors, and finalized the marketing contracts. But I buried a poison pill in every single one of those contracts. I ensured that the primary liability for any failure, any bankruptcy, or any lawsuit fell squarely on the person who signed the papers, Clara. She signed them with a smile, thinking I was helping her reach the stars. She had no idea she was signing her own financial death warrant. By the time the wedding preparation started, I had successfully drained the liquid assets from the company and moved them into a blind trust. On paper, the company looked like a gold mine. The revenue was high, the investments were flashy, and the reputation was stellar. But it was all debt. It was a digital illusion. I had created a scenario where every single cent of profit was essentially borrowed from the trust I controlled. I remember one afternoon, 3 months before the wedding, I was sitting in my father's office. He was ranting about how unprofessional I looked compared to Marcus. "Look at him," he said, pointing to a photo of Marcus in a business magazine. "He is the face of the family. You, Alex, are just in the way." I didn't argue. I just looked at the stack of documents on his desk, the ones he hadn't yet filed, that contained the power of attorney he had recently granted to Marcus. I had spent weeks rewriting the digital version of those documents. The next time they logged into their system to finalize their taxes or apply for a massive bank loan, they would be using my versions of the forms. Forms that explicitly stated that in the event of a financial discrepancy, the responsibility shifted from the company to the individual board members, my father, Marcus, and Clara. It was almost too easy. They were so blinded by their own greed and their desire to climb the social ladder that they never once checked who held the keys to the kingdom. I wasn't just watching them fail. I was actively engineering their fall. I spent my nights in my private office, sipping coffee, watching the stock prices shift on my monitors. I felt like a conductor in a symphony, waiting for the final crescendo. Every day, I'd see Marcus strutting around the office, acting like a ting, and Clara posting photos of her design process, oblivious to the fact that they were literally walking on thin ice that I had thinned to the breaking point. They thought I was just the guy who fixed the Wi-Fi or handled the boring paperwork. They didn't know I had the ability to shut down their entire world with one command. I wasn't waiting for the wedding because I wanted to attend. I was waiting because that was the date they had set for their official public announcement of a massive merger, the merger that would finally consolidate their control and make them untouchable. They wanted to announce their total success in front of everyone they knew, and I was going to give them exactly that: a public stage, an audience, and a front row seat to their total humiliation. I wasn't just burning their world down. I was going to make sure they saw the flames and understood exactly who held the lighter. The day of the wedding arrived with the heat that felt heavy, suffocating, the perfect backdrop for the storm I had spent years brewing. The ballroom of the Grand Plaza was, in a word, excessive. It was filled with the city's high society, the kind of people who judge you by your net worth and the brand of your watch. My father was at the head of the center table, his chest puffed out like a peacock holding a champagne flute. He had spent the last 2 hours telling anyone who would listen about the incredible, record-breaking merger that was going to be signed officially the very next day. Marcus was pacing near the stage, his suit tailored to perfection, his ego even larger. He caught my eye from across the room and gestured for me to come over. When I walked up, he didn't even acknowledge me as a guest. He leaned in, his breath smelling of expensive scotch, and whispered, "Alex, you're looking a bit drab. Try to stay in the shadows during the toast. We don't want the staff ruining the photos." I didn't answer. I just smiled, a slow, deliberate expression that made him blink in confusion. I walked past him toward the control booth at the back of the ballroom. The technician, a man I had hired months ago, gave me a subtle nod. I took my seat, pulled out my laptop, and waited for the clock to strike 8. The master of ceremonies announced, "And now for the toast from the man of the hour, Marcus." Marcus stepped onto the stage, the lights blinding him. He began his speech, a masterclass in arrogance. He talked about vision, about hard work, about how he and Clara had built this legacy from the ground up, overcoming tremendous obstacles. He even had the audacity to glance in my direction and say, "And of course, we're thankful for all the quiet help behind the scenes that makes success like this possible." The crowd applauded. My father wiped a tear of pride from his eye. I hit the button. The massive LED screens that were supposed to display a slideshow of the bride and groom went pitch black. The silence in the room was immediate, heavy and awkward. Then a single, stark white document appeared on the screen. It was the legal ownership structure of the firm, clearly showing that the family firm had zero assets and was entirely owned by a holding company, my holding company. A murmur broke out across the room. Marcus stared at the screen, his face turning a shade of pale that I hadn't thought possible. He tried to laugh it off. "A technical glitch, everyone, just Before he could finish, the screen changed again. This time, that was a ledger. It showed the last 5 years of bank statements, the embezzlement records for Marcus's private accounts, and the bankruptcy filings for every single subsidiary Clara had founded. The numbers were in red, bold, blindingly obvious. "What is this?" my father roared, standing up, his face turning purple. He looked around, panicked, as he saw the elite of the city pulling out their phones, snapping photos of the screen. I stood up from the control booth and walked toward the center of the stage. Every head in the room turned to watch me. I didn't look like the failure anymore. I looked like the man who owned the room. I walked up the stairs, the microphone already in my hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice amplified by the massive sound system echoing through the ballroom. "I apologize for the interruption, but I believe you all deserve to know who you're actually celebrating tonight. You aren't celebrating a success story, you are celebrating a house of cards built on lies." Marcus lunged at me, his face twisted in rage, but security, the men I had hired, stepped in and physically held him back. It was a sight to behold, the CEO of the year being restrained at his own wedding. For 5 years, I continued, my voice steady. "I have watched my family lie to you. They told you they were visionaries. The truth is, they were leeches. Every dollar you see spent on this lavish wedding, every suit, every gown, every drop of champagne, none of it was theirs. It was mine. I have spent the last 5 years cleaning up their messes, paying their debts, and keeping them afloat, all while they mocked me to my face." I turned to my father, who was now trembling. "Dad, the merger you're so proud of? It doesn't exist. There is no buyer. There is no legacy. There is only a massive debt that, as of today, is legally tied to your personal assets. You are, in every sense of the word, bankrupt." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of the wedding guests starting to stand up, whispering, grabbing their coats. The facade had cracked and the vultures were circling. Clara stood in the middle of the ballroom, her wedding dress looking like a burial shroud. She looked at Marcus, then at our father, and finally at me. There was no defiance left in her eyes, just a hollow, empty realization of her new reality. She knew that her lifestyle, her fame, and her status had vanished in the blink of an eye. "I don't want an apology," I said to the room, my voice final. I don't want an explanation. I just wanted the truth to be the last thing you saw before your world ended. I placed the microphone down on the podium. I didn't scream. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I simply walked off the stage, past the shocked guests, past the family that had tried to bury me, and toward the exit. As I reached the heavy glass doors of the ballroom, I paused and looked back one last time. My brother was slumped in a chair, his head in his hands. My father was arguing with a frantic lawyer, and my sister was being comforted by a bridesmaid who looked as terrified as she was. It was a complete, total, and irreversible collapse. I pushed the doors open and stepped into the cool, quiet night air. The city lights were bright, indifferent to the drama behind those doors. I got into my car, took a deep breath, and felt the weight of those 5 years lift off my shoulders. I wasn't the failure anymore. I wasn't the errand boy. I was the man who had regained his power, his dignity, and his freedom. I didn't look back. I drove until the Grand Plaza was nothing but a speck in my rearview mirror. And for the first time in my life, I truly realized that revenge isn't about hurting someone else. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself that they thought they could steal.